Keep your eyes open tonight and into the holiday weekend for what, in this business, we inartfully call a news dump. I know it sounds kind of gross. It's supposed to sound kind of gross. Friday nights, since time immemorial, have always been a great time to release to the public information that you do not really want the public to pay attention to. And that's, for the obvious reason. On weekends, people are not as plugged in. So weekends in general have always been seen by politicians, public figures, corporations, as a very convenient repository for dumping embarrassing news or politically inconvenient news. That's true of weekends in general. Holiday weekends, all the more so. So I do hope you get some time off for the holiday weekend. I hope you enjoy your weekend in general, but just keep in mind, this is one of those times to sort of just keep eyes open. All politicians, all public figures to a certain extent, have to manage the art of diverting people's attention at times, changing the subject, creating deliberate distractions. And, some politicians are better at it than others, but all good politicians have to be able to do it to a certain degree. Our current president is very, very, very good at it. He doesn't just have that skill like a normal politician. He has a peculiar nuclear version of it. Let me explain what I mean. A normal political way, a normal politician's way to change the subject, the way a normal politician does it is to stop talking about whatever that person finds inconvenient or unfavorable or uncomfortable. Stop talking about that thing that they don't want to talk about, and instead start talking about something else and hope that you bring people along to this new topic that you're happier to talk about. A slightly advanced or more aggressive version of that for a normal politician is to try to not just start talking about a new thing, but to put a little spice on the new thing. Try to create a new controversy that's unrelated to and far apart from this thing you don't want to talk about. One even further advanced, even more aggressive way to do that is to maybe pick a new fight with some convenient enemy that has nothing to do with that thing you don't want to talk about. Normal politicians have an array of choices when it comes to distracting and changing the subject. Depends on the politician, depends on the subject matter, but bottom line is basically you need to do something or say something that seems more interesting to people, that seems more interesting to the media than whatever it is you didn't want to talk about in the first place. That is normal politician behavior. That is normal politician skill set. What our new president does is different. What our new president does is really a special twist on that tradition. There is a special ingredient that he is willing to cook with that nobody else is. And that is that he deliberately tries not just to distract, but to offend. He doesn't just merely distract people, he disgusts people. He breaks the bounds of decency, breaks the bounds of what people generally agree are the moral rules for engagement in public discourse, and he breaks those rules in a way that doesn't just start a new narrative, it stops all normal politics and all normal media coverage of current events. His specialty, what marks him out, is really a different kind of cat, is that he is very willing, happy even, deliberately trying to go past the merely controversial. He goes past provocative. He goes right to language, right to public discourse and behavior that, instead of just being controversial or provocative, is considered abusive or even repulsive. And I'm not saying this just to fling a bunch of negative adjectives at the president over his behavior. If you've been watching the show for some time, you know that I don't actually talk about him much at all. The reason I'm talking about this is that I think it's actually important in terms of understanding his variety of political power and, therefore, our political time as a country right now. Because the way he generates distraction, the way he changes the subject away from things he doesn't want to talk about, it's more than just a quantitative difference from what other politicians do. What he does is really qualitatively different than normal politicians. Because the way he does it, what he does, draws other people in to participate in his distraction, almost whether they want to or not. Simply by also being public figures, or also being politicians, or even just being people who have observed his repugnant behavior, there is among all sorts of people a natural inclination, a decent inclination to get involved in what he is doing, to participate in his distraction process, to not just witness it, but to feel called to respond by virtue of the fact that you have witnessed it. I mean, when somebody does something that is merely offensive, you decide if you're offended or not. When somebody does something that is worse than that, that is repugnant and abusive, there is something that is good and decent and understandable in all of us that makes us not want to just have a feeling about it. It makes us want to express our opposition, to weigh in as being opposed to this vile thing, this vile behavior that we have seen from somebody in that kind of a position. With a normal politician's normal political distraction, almost all of us will just observe it, right? We're either distracted by it or we're not. This guy's strategy, though, it really is different. It's to sort of tap on the glass of your moral compass. Is this thing on? To try to make you feel implicated by your silence, what you have witnessed, what he did. This guy's strategy really is to be so upsetting, so reprehensible, so disruptive and insulting to the norms of what we agree to as Americans in public life, that he draws everybody into the response to what he's done. Everybody feels like you can't just see it, you have to say something about it in order to stand up for your own dignity. And that then provides another round of attention, because then there's this interesting story to cover of how all these strange bedfellows, all these usual competitors, all these people you'd never associate with this president, they're all weighing in on what he's done. They're all weighing in on the president's behavior and the president's speech because they feel reasonably compelled to remark upon, to condemn whatever disgusting thing he has just done. What he has perfected is a nuclear version of a conventional political tactic. It is conventional politics to distract. It is not conventional politics to disgust. And the reason he does it, the reason he's mastered this as a tactic and uses this tactic over and over again in a way that we have really, honestly, never seen before from somebody at this level of American politics, the reason he can do it, the reason it makes sense for him to do it, is because the thing he harms by behaving this way, the thing he harms by sneering at the boundaries of decency and then breaking those bounds with glee, what he hurts by doing that is something that doesn't belong to him. The thing he damages is something he neither owns nor particularly values, in the abstract at least. The thing he hurts is the presidency, and by extension, the standing of the United States of America. And if you're a person who doesn't really care about those things, someone who doesn't think those things are all that valuable, someone who certainly doesn't feel any responsibility for not only recognizing their value, but upholding their value with your own behavior, then why not let those things take the hit? Why not let those things absorb the costs? The presidency? The standing of the United States among nations? If those costs are external to you, if those things aren't yours, then those costs, when you hurt them, are external. And the rewards of your behavior that hurts them is internal. The rewards all accrue to you, right? The ability to create infinite distraction at will, the ability to lead the media and to lead much of the nation basically on a choke chain at will, because you are willing to go beyond provocative and controversial to the point of disgust. All the benefits of that accrue to him. The harm of it is to the country. And if you don't care, it's a win-win, right? This president is a different kind of political animal because he doesn't mind getting negative press. He doesn't mind bad press. He also doesn't mind any harm that he does to the presidency by his behavior. But I think there's been a fundamental sort of misunderstanding that you saw in the frustration of his opponents last year. His opponents in the presidential primary last year and his opponent in the general election last year, they were so frustrated and angry by his ability to command media attention. They really felt like, in the Republican primary and in the general election, they really felt like they were never really able to even compete with him in terms of attention, in terms of screen time, in terms of face time with the American people. And they were right about that, because all of the other politicians who ran for president last year were kind of normal politicians. And they were playing, therefore, a different game than he was playing. Everybody else was, for sure, trying to get media attention. But everybody else other than him was trying to get good media attention. They were trying to get positive media attention for themselves and their ideas. He was not that picky. You've heard that phrase, there's no such thing as bad press. It's mostly, right? That's mostly an axiom that people don't go along with. There are some people in the world who do. And so just think about the incentives here. Think about how this works as political science. Whether or not you're interested in the personalities involved here and the individual people as humans. Think about what this means for us as a country and how the political science of this works, how the incentives stack up. When the ability to shock and offend, and now that he's president, to harm the presidency and harm the country in the process, is something that he takes as cost-free to him, we should expect him to do more of it. Over the past 2 days, the president has been roundly condemned by like 358 degrees of the 360-degree circle of American politics. He has been robustly, thoroughly, blisteringly condemned and denounced and renounced by a country, and in particular by a political class that is genuinely mortified by how he is behaving as president. There is nothing to suggest that that bothers him in the least. I think the way this goes down in his White House political playbook is as a resoundingly effective stunt. Wow, look at how I turned the narrative around to this. This is a tactic that worked very well for him. As a distraction, this was a home run. And given the incentives at work here, given the values of this person and the administration that we are dealing with now, I don't know what the cure is to this. I don't know what the defense is to this for us as a country. Because you can't let it go, right? I mean, maybe you can let it go when it's a private person or just an individual public figure, but when it's the president of the United States, that's a singular position. You can't let it go. What the president said yesterday about two of our colleagues here at MSNBC is absolutely worthy of shock and condemnation, which it has rightfully earned and which I share, and honestly, which everybody shares. And if it goes beyond what it appears to be and it reflects an underlying effort at extortion or coercion, that should be investigated as a potential criminal matter. And on top of that, we also as a country have to decide exactly how much we're going to play requests from him. Exactly how much we're going to talk about what he wants us to talk about. How much we're going to behave the way he wants us to behave. How much we're going to snap our attention to him when he commands it. All politicians learn to distract. This metastasized version of distraction that he plays, though, is deliberately, and I think we'll realize in the end, seriously harmful to the country and to the presidency specifically. That is the magic ingredient that he is willing to cook with that no other politician will. And again, no, I don't know what the cure is to that. When people are willing to do harm of that kind, and there's no way to stop them from doing it, I don't know what the cure is to that. But I do know what he's been distracting from in the last couple of days. Today, the revised Republican approach to repealing Obamacare that the president is apparently now proposing and endorsing, even though he rejected it in the past. Today, that new approach was scored by the CBO as not throwing 22 million Americans or 23 or 24 million Americans off of health insurance. No, the new version scored today would be 32 million Americans. 32 million Americans, to be clear, who have health insurance now, who would lose all health insurance under the new Republican plan that the president endorsed today. 32 million people. For reference, that is the combined population of all of these states that you can see on this map. 32 million people. So that's one. The president's latest gross-out behavior has coincided with the Republican health care bill turning into a political catastrophe. We're going to be checking in later on this hour with some of the very dramatic protest actions that hit today on that subject and tell you a little bit about what we expect to see over the next couple of days over the holiday weekend. The first day of the president's gross-out distraction, yesterday, also coincided with the White House announcing that the president will meet with Vladimir Putin next week in person. What has the Russian president done recently to deserve a one-on-one in-person meeting with the president of the United States? I mean, other than launch an unprecedented attack on our election last year? I don't know. But that announcement that Trump and Putin are going to meet in person, that was well-timed yesterday in the midst of the absolute furor over this distraction. It was well-timed yesterday for most people to have not heard anything about it. Here's another. You may have noticed last night when the Wall Street Journal published the first detailed reporting about Americans apparently trying to collude with the Russians who were attacking our election last year. This is a bombshell story that the Wall Street Journal posted last night. This is the first report. Rather than just speculation that it might have happened, questions about whether it did happen, descriptions of the investigation into whether it happened, this is the first report of potential collusion by Americans in that Russian attack. And it has raised very serious questions as to whether or not Michael Flynn, who was then a senior advisor to the Trump campaign, whether he might have been involved in that effort to work with the Russians, to contact the Russian government, to obtain materials hacked by the Russian government in order to use them here against Hillary Clinton. Now, in that story from the Wall Street Journal, which went live last night, you might have noticed that Shane Harris of the Wall Street Journal, he included a line in his story saying that he had asked the White House for comment on that story. They declined to give a comment, but asking for comment is a specific thing, right? It has logistical consequences. It means you have to show somebody what you've got and ask them for comment on it. So if you think about the logistics of what that means with that story being posted last night, that means that sometime before last night, when the White House was asked for comment, they became aware of what the Wall Street Journal was about to report. They knew that that story was coming out. They knew that that was in the pipeline. And so as they're preparing for that to drop, the first reporting about American collusion, attempted collusion at least, with the Russians who are attacking our election and what appears to be a very close tie to the president's campaign, potentially through Michael Flynn in that collusion. As they find out that's about to happen, perhaps coincidentally, the president launches this big new distraction that has everybody talking about him and his behavior for 2 days instead of talking about anything else. And I should tell you, we're going to be talking with investigative reporter Michael Isikoff later in the show about the key figure at the center of this Wall Street Journal bombshell. Mike Isikoff has tonight, he'll be joining us tonight with some very interesting information about the Republican operative at the center of that story and his history. That's important because the key question here is not just how effective that operative was in his effort to, I guess, collude with the Russians. The key question is whether there were links between him and the Trump campaign. So Mike Isikoff, investigative reporter par excellence, has some really interesting information on that. He's going to be joining us live in just a few minutes. And let me give you just one last thing here. If we're talking about focus. Mike Rogers is the head of the National Security Agency. National Security Agency is a very powerful agency that focuses on foreign surveillance. This is one of the agencies at the center of the Russia collusion investigation. Earlier this week, CNN had a report that described Mike Rogers, head of the NSA, expressing, quote, frustration to lawmakers about his inability to convince President Trump to accept U.S. intelligence that Russia meddled in the election. That's according to a congressional source familiar with the meeting. Mike Rogers, head of the NSA, also reportedly shared concerns with lawmakers about the, quote, lack of White House focus on the continued threat from Russian cyber efforts, particularly relating to U.S. voting systems. That's according to another congressional source. So the NSA is frustrated that the president doesn't get that Russia attacked us or doesn't care and cannot focus on trying to fight it at all. I mean, take a look at that coupled with what the Washington Post reported this weekend. Just, I mean, for contrast, Washington Post had this great rundown this weekend about European countries and all the things they do to actively respond to the way Russia interferes with them. In Sweden, they've launched a nationwide school program to teach kids to identify Russian propaganda. In Lithuania, 100 citizens are called cyber elves who work to digitally identify and combat people who are spreading Russian propaganda and fake news. They call their little wars online elves versus trolls. This is one of the elves doing an adorable video. France and Britain got Facebook to disable tens of thousands of fake accounts that they thought could potentially be designed to sway their voters during election times. Places like Ukraine and Germany have fact-checking consortiums that are robust and well-respected. The Ukraine one is stopfake.org. There's all these examples actively available for our review all around the world of all these other countries and how they've dealt with trying to stop Russia meddling in their elections. Contrast that. All of those examples in all of those different countries, a bunch of which we got testimony about in the U.S. Senate this week. Contrast what they're doing with what's going on here. I mean, it couldn't be starker. Fascinating report in Talking Points memo today that the Department of Homeland Security will not be conducting any sort of audit to look into whether voting machines were affected by the Russian hacking attempts in this past election. When they say there's no evidence that that happened, they haven't been looking for any evidence of that, and they have no plan to look for any evidence of that. If as many as 21 states, or other reports say maybe 39 states, were targeted by Russian hackers, and those were the election systems of those states, is it worth looking into what the impact was of those intrusions? Whether they left any malware behind? Whether voting machines were affected? There's no evidence that's been provided that that happened. Nobody has looked for that evidence. And while nobody was talking about that whatsoever, the House Appropriations Committee very quietly just voted to defund something called the Election Assistance Commission. Buried at the bottom of page 69 of this bill that they passed, it zeroes out the entire $4 million budget of the Election Assistance Commission. The Election Assistance Commission is the agency we've got as a country that tries to make sure our state's voting machines aren't hacked. That's the agency, that's the mechanism within our government that is supposed to shore up and defend the security of our voting systems. That agency is the way we would be responding to try to harden the defenses of our election systems if we were interested in doing that as a country. But apparently we're not interested in doing it as a country. There's no work being done on that since the Trump administration took over. And not only are we not using the Election Administration Commission to do that, we are instead chucking it, eliminating that agency altogether. Very quietly. There's a lot going on. Don't let anybody yank your chain. Do not play requests.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.